Hey guys, Andy and Spoken Label back in the house. Last podcast of the year. Yes, it's been a busy year for Spoken Label, and it kind of makes sense to go out with a bang, as I always say, in the end of the year, last podcast of the year. So we've got a great gentleman with me today here, who I've been speaking to a bit by email recently, and I want to throw kudos out to obviously my good buddy here, Eric Loveland Heath, who's just had a 2 hour plus podcast come out with Spoken Label, which we recorded a few weeks ago, and I had a hoot with Jack. I go many years back with Jack now, and not Jack, Eric. I'm getting my name gets mixed up here. So yeah, I've got back many years of Eric, and Eric's got his own publishing house now, Plenty Wedlock, and the third book that's come out for it is with my guest today, a fantastic Dr. Jack Hunter, not Dr. Eric Hunter, as I nearly said a second ago. Then that would have caused some confusion. How did you meet Eric then, Jack? Before we start, then.
Oh yeah, me and Eric go back a long way as well.
Hmm.
Um, we first met through a band that I used to play in called Strap the Button,
Oh,
and
I've got that album. Oh, I didn't know that was you. All right.
yeah,
Oh, wow.
and Eric kind of merged into us at one point. We became we ended up being like a 10-piece band, and so we've been playing music together for ages. And actually today, my new band Mascot Moth, we have a single coming out. Should be released at 3 o'clock, and Eric's on that as well.
Oh, right. Right. Well, obviously, before we get into everything else today, then, where can people get hold of this single then? First of all, then, just because
Yeah.
this will be out pretty promptly. This podcast, I want it out before Christmas time. So,
Yeah. It's mascotmoth.bandcamp.com. So if you search for Mascot Moth, you'll find it. Yeah.
I'll be on that straight away after we finish this chat today. I did not know about that. So, obviously, Mascot Moth then, Moth. What kind of music is it if people are interested before we start then?
I would usually describe it as a kind of sort of like psychedelic progressive rock. But the tune that we're releasing today is kind of a disco tune. So
Brilliant. I'll be on that later on straight. I can promise you that. Oh, mate, fantastic. Obviously now, obviously like I said before, I'm here today to talk about you and your non-musical activities. So, and that's what I love about doing podcasts like this. I should have guessed knowing Eric, there'd be some kind of musical connection. So, but brilliant. Now, obviously then, tell us a bit about yourself from a non-musical perspective then, because we've got a lot of ground to cover today with your book particular. And I know you told me before, you're originally from the Liverpool area, but you're living in mid Wales now, aren't you? So take us back in time. Where did all this, your writing come from originally then?
I was born in Liverpool and I moved to the Tanat Valley when I was about 4 years old. And we moved into a caravan and we lived right at the very end of the Tanat Valley. And I think, almost as soon as we arrived here, I was kind of enchanted by it. And it's obviously so very different to the urban environment that I knew as I was very, very young. And I think that has played a big part in ultimately the trajectory that my, career and research and all of those kinds of things has taken. It gave me a kind of like a taste for magic, I think, is what I would call it. This kind of
Yeah.
feeling of magic. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, obviously, I can see that straight away because I'm going to name the books, a couple of these books you've done, okay? Bits and pieces, and
Mhm.
people will encourage people to check them all out because I've got a fair bit to catch up on here straight away. But obviously, like, was your first collection Greening the Paranormal back in 19, was it? Or are my dates wrong?
No, well, your dates are right, but my first collection was actually in 2012.
Oh,
And
wow. Wow.
yeah, which was a collection of papers about anthropology and the paranormal.
Wow.
So it kind of started off with anthropology, which is what my PhD is in. And then it kind of branched out into other areas like ecology and also transpersonal psychology and parapsychology and these kinds of things.
Yeah, and like you obviously you look at it, you do talk to explore a lot of things like many minds, cosmologists, mediumship, which I've got a lot of interest in. And
Mm.
fascinating topics indeed. I could ask you a lot about this, but I'd have to spend more time getting prepared for it.
Yeah.
But we'll do that on the part two
Fair
next
enough.
year, mate, definitely. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, here today we're talking about your most, at least I think it's your most recent collection anyway, done through
Yeah.
Eric's The Folklore of the Tanat Valley, which is obviously
Mm.
people will know you is rooted in Welsh landscape and myth. Now, What I want to ask them before we go into why, is how do you see your work has evolved over these books? Is there any kind of thread that ties everything together, do you think, apart from yourself?
Yeah. I think, well, I usually think about what I do as very non-reductive is the term that I use. I don't, not too keen on sort of simple things, and I'm interested in complexity. And because it's non-reductive, it's also kind of cumulative. So when I go back to my earlier work, it's kind of it's starting out, and then I add on layers to it. So as you kind of go through the sequence of the books, really, you don't have to read them in a sequence, but as you do the kind of the scope kind of expands outwards. So I start off with, being interested in human beings, mediums and th their experiences and what they do. And then I become interested in the social interactions that they have. So you move out into the kind of social, cultural layer. And then eventually I started to become interested in where these things connect with the next layer out, which is kind of the ecological, the how these things feed into or sit within natural systems. And that's what Greening the Paranormal is really about, exploring where
Oh.
these extraordinary experiences and ecology kind of come together. And then for the folklore, this is another strand of this. It's where people's experiences in the landscape and the natural environment itself kind of come together through storytelling. And it's the way that these experiences are made meaningful to people in particular ecological and cultural contexts. So that, this is the strand that flows through it is really, thinking about the ways that these kinds of extraordinary experiences are embedded within all sorts of different kinds of processes and systems.
Nice, nicely put. No, I can understand you completely. But it's like I think as a fellow writer myself, like I found all the books I've done, each one's is progressed on from the other one. And have you found it's been like a reaction from the first book to the second? Then you tend to move on, don't you? Like whether it's in left or right, or something's coming back to center. I think everything makes sense into a circle, really, eventually.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, with the
Well,
folk,
yeah,
I'm
and
sorry.
I find that I keep saying the same things. So I was just gonna say, find to keep saying the same things kind of over and over again and rephrasing them. I think Colin Wilson, who wrote books about the outsider, and these kinds of things, he said that he basically wrote the same book over and over again throughout his whole career, trying to express the same kind of point, the fundamental point.
Yeah, no, I get you completely with that. Yeah, agreed. People say the same about me sometimes on my books I've wrote as well. So no, I understand you there. Okay,
Yeah.
now obviously I have to ask you next. Obviously, we're gonna go for the why book next. Now, obviously, you've given us a hint already
Mhm.
about when you moved into your valley when you were much younger in a caravan. What exactly called you to do this project? Because it could be, from what your background, Jack, it could be academic, personal, or was it something even more stranger?
I think, as with most things, it's a kind of combination of all of those different strands coming together. There's definitely a strange aspect to it, which links to the personal aspect. One personal kind of experience early on, I was kind of quite taken by was, and I have got this described in the book, where my sister had an experience of what she thought was a leprechaun in the house.
Yeah, I
And
saw that story. Yeah.
yeah. And so, it gave me this sense that, people have these strange experiences, whatever ultimately the explanation for them might be. People do have these experiences even in our modern world. So that was a kind of personal interest. I've also personally always been interested in stories and folklore, and especially around the Tanat Valley, there are a few really kind of well-known stories that people know, even from school kind of age. So we've got stories about the Wiberadeniog, who is this winged viper who
That
would
was the
steal
first thing
sheep
I
and
wanted to
stuff.
know about. Yeah, so it was just a
Yeah.
fantastic story. Now, obviously, I hadn't heard of this one before, but obviously, I'm not from your area. So I'll tell
Sure.
people a bit more about this because this is fantastic, this story.
Yeah, so this is one that I learned, quite early on in my life. And even when I was in school, me and my friend made an animated film based
Oh
on it
wow.
out of plasticine. I don't think it exists anymore, but this is the kind of thing. And the basic story is that it's based around Llanrydder and Mochnant, which is where Pistyll waterfall is, the big tall waterfall. And there was, farmers living there, and they used to say that there was two nesting sites for this serpent, this winged serpent. One was at Penargarnedd, and the other nesting site was in Llansilin, and Llanrydder kind of lies just between them. And as the serpent was flying over Llanrydder to its nesting site in Llansilin, it would sort of pick up sheep and start to steal cattle and stuff like that. And it got to a point that the villagers had no choice but to ask the sort of local cunning man how they were going to deal with this viper. And he said that the best thing to do was to erect a big standing stone, get the blacksmith to make sort of loads of iron spikes, and then attach the spikes onto the standing stone. And then he said you have to cover the stone and the spikes over with a red cloth, a red sheet. And in the same way that, when you waggle a matador waggles a red cloth to anger a bull, the whipbear flies over, sees this thing, and he smashes into it, attacks it, and impales himself on the spikes underneath. And according to the story, for years afterwards, the villagers commemorated this stone. They called it a post goch, which means the red post. Sometimes also called post a whibber, which is the viper's post. And apparently, it used to get painted red every year out of memory of this. But you can still see the stone today, standing out just outside the village in a field, and it's quite immense when you go up to see it. So, we knew these kinds of stories. Even the primary school in Llanrydder has this a mural of it painted on the wall. So, we did have access to some of these legends as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Wow. Now, people will know the book, obviously. We've agreed, haven't we? You tell us a few more stories here about these. And that was one of them.
yeah.
Now, I want to learn a bit more about, is it these Sherry Giants? Cewri.
Yeah,
My, ah,
Cewri.
bad
Uh,
Welsh.
yeah, in Welsh, cawr is giant
Ah,
and cewri is giants. So it's the plural of giant. And yeah, it seems like, this area has got quite a rich giant tradition. There were three main giants in the area called Cawr Berwyn, Cawr Rhoddwyn, and Cawr Myfyr. And I don't know whether they were brothers or cousins or whatever, but each of the giants has got their own kind of area of action. And obviously, the Berwyn Mountains, which is where we are, is named after Berwyn the giant, and Cader Berwyn, which is the tallest hill in the Berwyn Mountains, is his sort of chair, his throne. Um, and some of the stories about Cawr Berwyn are really interesting. There's one up by Llanrydder and Mochnant where there is this huge pile of rocks that, according to geology, they were deposited there by glaciers. But according to the folklore, it was the giant Berwyn who dropped them, and he was trying to build a bridge across the valley. There's two explanations really for it. One suggests that he was living at Penat Malangell, which is a famous sanctuary, a haven in the area, and he had to get back before a curfew. So he was building this bridge, and he ran out of time to get back, so he had to drop the boulders and leave. And the other suggestion is he was doing it at night, and he wanted to do it before the cock crowed, but then he ran out of time because the boulders are so heavy.
yeah.
Um,
I've been looking at a few of your pictures, obviously, in your little book here, and the one that the
yeah.
Viper's Nest one looks that's a heck of a stone, that one.
Oh, it's massive. It's immense. Yeah, it's an
Yeah.
amazing thing.
It's like you're looking at some of these. How, obviously, like the Vipers Post one, for example. How do we have any ideas how long that's been there for, even?
Well, they often these stones are at least sort of Bronze Age. Some of
Mm.
them could be later. They could be sort of medieval scratching posts and things like that. But this particular stone, I'm going to put my hat on it and say that it's a Bronze Age standing stone.
Fantastic. No.
Could be earlier, but yeah. But it's been interpreted, hasn't it, over thousands of years. this is the kind of story that has come out of it to explain how it got there. Um, yeah.
Yes, fantastic. It really is. Now, obviously, people wonder. Obviously, we're not the book itself doesn't just cover your book. Obviously, it doesn't just cover like Bronze Age or far from the past myths and legends. You've also got a bit of UFOlogy as well, which caught my eye,
Oh yeah.
particularly because I used to listen a lot to the Howard Hughes show. I was a big fan of him when he was
Oh
alive.
yeah.
Yeah, it's great fun to see some of the UFOlogy is here as well. So now
Yeah.
tell us about the story then. Obviously, the 1974 was it Berwyn mounting UFO?
Exactly. So yeah, this is a it was a famous, well, still is a famous event, and people around still remember it today. And you can ask them to recall the events of that night. And basically, what happened was there was a huge explosion or a booming sound up in the mountains, and people saw bright lights up there. And it was kind of assumed that it must have been some sort of air crash, a plane had crashed up there. And before long, it didn't take long, but the whole area was kind of cordoned off by the military. So it's got all of these interesting kind of cover-up vibes around it as well. But the thing that I find most intriguing about it is the actual experiences that people had, on that strange night. Not whether it was being covered up or whatever, but what people actually saw and experienced. And there's a great book about it by the folklorist Andy Roberts. He interviewed one of the main witnesses of the crash, Pat Evans, who was a nurse. She lived in Llanderfel, which was just on the other side of the Berwyns from the Tanat Valley. And she said that when she went up to the mountains, because she was a nurse, she thought that if it was a crash, she might be able to help out. And she said that she saw this huge orange flat disc. She said it didn't look like a 3D object, it looked like a two-dimensional disc. And it was, standing upright. And it was like an ember. And she said that she saw these little smaller lights moving in towards it, which she described as like fairy lights.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, I mean, it's a pretty intense kind of weird experience, and it's a bit stranger than, some of the kind of standard UFO kinds of encounters. And something that I've been looking into recently is the way that it actually fits into an older motif in Welsh folklore about
Hmm.
seeing these weird geometric apparitions. So there's lots of interesting accounts from the 18th century, so like, 200 years before the Berwyn incident, of people seeing strange geometric forms, pyramid kinds of shapes, um, things like that, oblongs, circles that get bigger and smaller, and things like that.
Yeah.
There was also the Egrin lights in the early 1900s. Yeah.
So it's interesting
So
that
pretty
because
weird, but that's our kind of local UFO story.
yeah, I think every area's got one or two like that. But no, I think I agree with you completely everything you're saying on that because it's fascinating because you think obviously like everything we all think that 1947 obviously was the big one in America, but there's examples of it. I've seen them in Manchester from 16th,
Yeah.
17th century. They've been around for a long time. It's just because they didn't have the technology we've got now, we can't always pick up from it then. But yeah, no, that's fascinating. Fascinating that. So it's no fascinating stuff indeed. Now, obviously. Itself on the book, then, what drew first? You've told us a little hint before, obviously, about obviously it's your background, obviously your personal side of it. What drew you to this as a place worth documenting in this current book?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of strands again to this.
Hmm.
And
I'd be
one of
surprised if
them
there
is,
wasn't.
as yeah, I was always kind of interested in folklore, but at the same time, I always felt that there was, I collected folklore books, and I always felt that there was kind of not much. I would look through them and I'd not find much about the Tanat Valley, and I used to think that it was a kind of a place where there wasn't much folklore actually, and it's just like typical because that's where I live, so it's going to be a place where there's nothing fun. And for years, me and my cousins used to go and play up on the mountain in Llangon or Craig. and we would kind of make up Lord of the Rings style stories about the mountain. We would draw maps on the mountain and say that this is where the elves lived and that's where the dwarves lived and that kind of thing. So, although I felt like there wasn't much folklore that I knew other than these, few stories that were quite popular, we kind of created our own folklore to go on top of it. And then years later, and actually Eric is involved here as well because he gave me a copy of this book, A Wanderer in North Wales, um, which is by an author from Llansamfraid called Cledwyn Hughes. And he described in there walking through the Berwyn Mountains, and he put these really kind of gothic descriptions, and he mentioned these little bits of folklore in there. He talked about the Cwn Annwn, which are the hounds of the underworld. And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that we had these kind of stories attached here. And then I started to dig a little deeper and found all sorts of other things. And I even found that the mountain Craigcrwrth, where we'd spent our childhood and made these stories up, was well known as a fairy mountain the whole time. And that, yeah, that there were supposed to be tunnels in the mountain that lead down to fairyland, that miners had gone into caves on the mountain and had gone as deep as they could into it looking for new things to dig, and found that it was inhabited by fairy washerwomen and all of these kinds of things. And so then all of a
Fantastic.
sudden there was a kind of a deluge of all of these different folklore stories, which were, made me think actually there is a kind of a hidden folklore here that people know a few of the stories, the main ones about Pennant Malangell and about the giants and about the dragon, but not so much about these fairy mountains and the tunnels and also fairy experiences. And then I found this experience that was from Bulchadar, which is about it's about 9 miles down the road from Llangynog, where my sister had her experience. And this account was from 200 years before that. And the guy in the house had woken up and seen dancing on the floor in his bedroom a little group of small fairies and a little small man standing on the end of his bed. And my sister had said
Fantastic.
that she'd seen a little small man in my bedroom dancing on the shelf. So there's,
Wow.
lots of weirdness. See what I mean?
Yeah, it's okay. I think you look at the perspective of the books you've done. I think it's a great, definitely way moving forward for yourself. And it's a very personal book. It shows throughout all of it as well. Um, how long did it take you to research this book then? Was it quite a straightforward research, was it?
Well, it's taken a good few years actually. I think I first published a little article about Tanat Valley folklore in
Hmm.
2015. So it's been about, since that first article I wrote, it's been about, well, 10 years really of research. It's only a small book, but I had to dig quite deep to find some of the stories. And I still think that there is a lot. Um, I think there probably will be a second edition. Hopefully that'll contain, more contemporary stories from people who live here today. But I think also there probably are strands of the older traditions as well, still buried in the archives, of the National Library of Wales and things like that, which need to be dug into as well.
I mean, well, I don't know if you talked, Eric's told you this, but he's asked me to do something similar to yours where I live in Tameside, and I've got about
Yeah,
10 pages wrote to it. Mine will be out whenever, so I'll send you a copy of when it's done so you can tell me what you think. Right? For
brilliant.
weirdness, so yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
not why. But yeah, it's like, how difficult a process was this? Obviously, in this fact of when you're researching what stories to include and what couldn't you include for whatever reason in this.
Yeah. I had to kind of draw a certain line because of my background and interest in sort of extraordinary experiences and the paranormal and that kind of thing. The main emphasis in the book is on that. But there are other strands of folklore as well that you could say have got nothing to do with the supernatural, which I could have gone into. In the valley, we have a whole interesting kind of musical traditions, for instance. This is one of the last places in Wales where they still have the plug-in,
Oh
which
yeah.
is a kind of a dawn kind of singing event that they hold in chapels. And they used to hold it all over Wales, but now there's only a few pockets of it left, and this is one of them. There's also a big musical heritage with Nancy Richards, who was Telenorris Maldwyn, who's a very famous harp player in the sort of late 1800s and into the up until sort of the mid 20th century. And there are people today who she taught to play the harp, still alive. But there's all sorts of stories attached to her as well, which I briefly mentioned her, but you could write whole other books about her adventures and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, and then
No.
obviously there's all the industrial stuff and the agricultural heritage as well, which is very rich. But probably best left to someone who's more into that kind of thing than me. So
Yeah.
I've just tried to focus on the supernatural paranormal folklore, but there's loads of other stuff as well.
No, it does. I think it's interesting when you do this sort of thing, and I'm finding this myself at the moment. I'm in one stage of below yours at the moment, but when you start digging, I think it is a surprise what you find sometimes. Was there anything that really surprised you when you were doing your research on this?
Mm. Well, the fairy traditions were what surprised me the most.
That's brilliant. That does, yeah.
Because yeah, I wasn't expecting it to be as kind of rich as it is. Um, we have got at least two fairy mountains, one at either end of the valley. There's Crycruath, which I mentioned, and then right at the other end of the valley, on the very border with Shropshire, there's Llanymynech Hill, which and both of these fairy mountains are Iron Age hill forts as well. And
Wow.
both of them are associated with mining. People have been mining in on Llanymynech Hill since the Roman times, the Roman copper mines on there. Um, so there's this richness to it, and then all these stories about tunnels. I wasn't really expecting that, but tunnels that lead down into fairyland essentially. There's a great story um, about Llanymynech Hill with yeah, with a man who wanders down into the tunnels through the caves, and he says that he can hear the sounds of the rivers going over the top of his head. And he says the further
That's
down you
it.
get, the closer into fairyland you get.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, these fairy stories I think were the most surprising because I really didn't expect them in the way that I knew that there was dragons and I knew that there was giants, but fairies had always seemed quite elusive. You just had to dig a little deeper to find them. The other thing that I found surprising was that people, contemporary people today, would, after I'd published these a couple of articles in the local newspaper, got in touch to say that they remembered their grannies and things like that telling them that they had seen fairies at the bottom of the garden. And it sort of suggests that there's a kind of kind of a lag now in the closeness to these kinds of stories. You know, it's people remember people telling them stories, but they don't necessarily, or at least they don't talk about their own experiences, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
But I reckon people do still have experiences. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. You're right with it. You hear about a lot of the older stories in it. Like I know a good half a dozen stories myself from the fairies, but you don't hear people coming forward about it nowadays. And it,
Mm.
it does that. You're right. It does. Why aren't people talking about it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, people are
Whether
opening
we've
up
lost the
about it.
ability or it's people aren't talking about it. You
Yeah,
do wonder, don't
exactly. There's a kind of taboo against it in some ways, and it's always been the way, really. You can say you're away with the fairies means that you're kind of you're not with it or whatever. So, there are all of these late cultural taboos against say, if you say that you've seen fairies, then you must, be crazy.
you? Yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah, that's true. It's a good point that when you look at sayings a lot like that, you say like, yeah, I hadn't thought of that. You're wary of the fairies. You're thinking that you are. Yeah, that's very good. That indeed. No, we should have thought of that. Yeah. Now, obviously, that's pretty well my question I wanted to ask you about in the book today. Anyway, but where is? with the sort of work you're doing, I always ask people what you're going to be doing next. But where do you see your research taking you next on your books or articles?
Yeah. Well, there's again different directions that I'm being taken in all the time. There's a couple of things I'll mention. One is a book that I'm really trying to finish off, which is called Of Minds and Monsters, or at least that's what I'm calling it. And it's kind of about it's about consciousness really and high strangeness and how, what kinds of models of consciousness would we need in order to make sense of, strange encounters with fairies and aliens or all of this kind of stuff. So that's kind of bubbling away and it's proving more difficult to to do than I expected. And the other thing that I'll mention is a project I probably will work with Eric on this one as well, around a house not far from Wrexham, by Chirk, in fact, which has got this huge accumulation of witch marks and different kinds of ritual objects. And we actually found what we think is a wand there in this
Oh,
sort of
wow. Wow.
collection of things. It's on display in Llangollen Museum at the moment, if anyone wants to go and see that. And I've written up a little bit about the wand to kind of explain about it. But I
Fantastic.
think what would be great to do would be to do a kind of a picture book, really, is what we're thinking, of objects from this house. So objects from a cunning man's house, and with little bits of text to kind of unpack and explain the objects. Um, so I think that's probably the next major project.
Keep us
Um,
informed. Keep us informed, definitely, 'cause I'd love to read that, Jack. Definitely after reading
yeah.
your current book. So now, obviously, where can people get hold of your books, first of all, then? In particular, obviously, I want to make sure we mention what people seeing today, Eric's book, the wonderful Plenty Led Wedlock book here, the Folklore, the Tanat Valley, particularly that one. But where can people get hold of your books, do you recommend?
Yeah, well, you can get them pretty much anywhere where, go to a good bookshop and they should be able to order them in. You can get them online. And for the folk book, the best place to get it is directly from us, from Eric. So you can go to his Big Cartel, Plenty Wenlock page, and you'll be able to find us on there.
Brilliant. Brilliant. I agree. Now, social media plugs for yourself then, Jack. If people want to drop you messages and
Mhm.
stuff or research you or whatever as they do,
Yeah.
where do you recommend they go?
The easiest thing to do is probably search for Dr. Jack Hunter on Google or something like that, and you'll find me and links to lots of different podcasts and things like that that I've done. I've got a website as well, which is jack-hunter.webstarts.com, and that's kind of a repository for everything that I do, really. It's mostly just lists of stuff. And I'm also on Facebook and on Instagram as well, so you can find me in many places.
Good to me. Thanks for that, Jack. I've really enjoyed today, mate. I've really been a pleasure, this, mate. I've been looking forward to this one for a couple of weeks, as I always am. But it's been great fun. Right, folks, we're going to let Jack take a quick breath, and he's going to come back and read a little extract from this book for us. And looking forward to this, sir. So thank you, Jack. It's been an absolute pleasure today, mate.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. Thanks for
Okay,
having me.
folks, we'll see you on two shakes of the dice.